The rain came in sideways that Friday morning, the kind that didn't announce itself until it was already soaking through the collar of your coat. Daniel Carter didn't have an umbrella. He hadn't owned one in 2 years, not since he'd left it on the subway platform, the night of Emily's first fever, rushing home with a thermometer and a bag of children's ibuprofen, and never thought about it again. That was the kind of man he'd become, the kind who forgot about himself by accident, not design, simply because there was always something else that needed remembering first. He pushed through the revolving door of Meridian First National Bank at 8:47 a.m. and stood for a moment inside the foyer, letting the warmth settle around him. The building was grand in the way that financial institutions in Midtown Manhattan always are: marble floors, the color of old cream, ceilings that soared 20 feet above brass light fixtures, a quiet hum of controlled efficiency that made you feel, without anyone saying so, that you should lower your voice, that you should be smaller than you were. Daniel didn't lower his voice. He just didn't have anything to say yet. He unzipped his jacket, the waterproof shell he'd bought secondhand 3 winters ago, faded navy, the left cuff fraying at the seam, and folded it over his arm. Underneath, he wore a clean button-down shirt, ironed that morning while Emily ate her cereal, chattering about a geography quiz she'd studied for the night before. "I know all the capitals, Dad. Every single one. Want to quiz me? After school?" he'd said. "You'll ace it." She'd rolled her eyes like only 10-year-olds can, fully, theatrically, with absolute conviction, and then kissed his cheek on the way out the door. He carried that with him now, standing in line at Meridian First National. The line moved slowly. There were 4 stations open, 2 tellers handling the early morning crowd. The man in front of Daniel wore a tailored charcoal suit and spoke on his phone without pause, a transaction involving 6 figures conducted in a voice that assumed the world was listening. The woman behind Daniel smelled of jasmine and wore heels that clicked against the marble with the steady confidence of someone who belonged. Daniel held his folder. Inside, a deposit slip. A small white envelope with 3 $20 bills and 2 fives, $60, of which he would deposit 50, and a handwritten note from Emily, a habit they'd kept since she was 7. Whenever he went to the bank, she drew something on a scrap of paper and folded it inside the envelope. Today it was a crayon sketch of a cat wearing a graduation cap, labeled in her careful cursive, "For your big dreams, Daddy." He reached the window. The teller was a young woman, mid-20s, hair pulled back. Name tag reading, Stefani. She looked up, and something passed across her face, quick, almost imperceptible, the kind of professional recalibration that service workers learn to make invisible. She didn't quite succeed. "Good morning," Daniel said. "Good morning. How can I help you?" He slid the deposit slip under the glass partition. "I'd like to make a deposit. $50. Into the youth savings account." Stephanie took the slip. Her eyes moved to the amount, then back to Daniel, then to his jacket folded over his arm, with its fraying cuff and faded color. She looked at the man in the way that people look at things when they are trying to categorize them quickly, to assign them to the correct box so that the interaction can proceed efficiently. Stephanie's box for Daniel Carter was not the right box. This was not something she could have known yet. "The youth savings account," she repeated. "Yes, account number's right there." She typed something, looked at the screen, typed again. "That's a children's savings account," she said, as if this required clarification. "My daughter's, Emily Carter. She's been saving for a trip to Washington, D.C. Her class is going in the spring." A pause. Stephanie's professional neutrality held, but barely. $50, she said again. Yes. He was not embarrassed. That was the thing that caught Stephanie off guard. She'd expected sheepishness, or the hunched shoulders of someone apologizing for the smallness of their transaction, the particular performance of apology that people in reduced circumstances sometimes offer preemptively, as if acknowledging the inadequacy before anyone can point it out saves some small portion of dignity. Instead, Daniel Carter stood straight, folder tucked under his arm, watching her with steady brown eyes that communicated nothing except patience. There was a quality to his stillness that Stephanie could not immediately name. She would think about it later, walking home. It was not resignation. It was not defeat. It was the stillness of someone who has decided, at some earlier point, and with great deliberateness, exactly how much of the world's opinion of them they are going to carry. And has decided none of it. Not today. Not here. She reached for the deposit slip. She didn't get there first. The double doors at the far end of the lobby swung open with the particular authority of people who have never had to wait for anything. Victoria Hale walked in the way she walked into every room she'd ever entered, with the quiet, absolute certainty of someone who had long since stopped asking permission. She was 51 years old, though she appeared ageless in the way that money and discipline and excellent dermatology produce. Her coat was a black cashmere wool blend that cost more than Daniel earned in a month. Her hair was dark with silver threading through it at the temples, worn back in a severe chignon that suited the sharp angles of her face. Behind her came two assistants, a young man with a leather portfolio and a tablet, and a woman in her 30s who walked half a step back and to the right, phone already raised, already anticipating. Behind them, a security detail that didn't look like security because they were too well dressed to look like anything but successful men who happened to be large. Victoria Hale was the majority shareholder and executive chair of Meridian Financial Group, of which Meridian First National Bank was one of 14 subsidiaries. She didn't typically come to branches. The fact that she was here on a rainy Friday morning meant something significant. And every employee in the building could feel it, a ripple of altered posture and straightened spines that moved through the room like a current. She was crossing toward the private offices at the back when she passed the teller stations. She passed Daniel's window. She stopped. Not fully, she didn't turn around. It was more a hesitation, a slight reduction in velocity. The way a person slows when something in their peripheral vision registers as interesting. Stephanie had begun counting the bills. 3 20s, 2 5s. "Is that $50? Victoria said. Her voice was not loud. She didn't need volume to fill a space. Stephanie looked up. Her face went a particular shade of pale. "Miss Hale, yes. It's a deposit. $50. Victoria turned, fully now, and looked at Daniel with the kind of measured, cool assessment that she might apply to a quarterly earnings report that wasn't meeting projections. "Into a savings account. My daughter's account," Daniel said. Victoria Hale's mouth curved. It was not a warm expression. "I see," she said. She didn't move on. The lobby had gone quiet. Not entirely. Transactions continued. Keyboards clicked. Someone across the room asked about a wire transfer. But the immediate vicinity of window 4 had developed the particular silence of people pretending very hard not to listen. "What is it exactly," Victoria said, "that you're hoping $50 will accomplish?" Her tone was conversational. Almost curious. That was the cruelest part of it. She wasn't sneering. She was asking the question the way someone asks about a minor curiosity they've stumbled across. A mildly interesting insect on the pavement. "It's a deposit," Daniel said. "Yes, you've established that." She tilted her head slightly. "But $50 into a children's savings account. It must take what? 6 months to save that up." One of her assistants shifted uncomfortably. The other was looking at his tablet. 2 weeks, Daniel said. "I deposit every 2 weeks. Admirable discipline," Victoria said, given the circumstances. She glanced at his jacket, at the folder, at the fraying cuff, one brief sweep that catalogued everything and dismissed it in the same motion. "You know, I built this bank on the principle that financial institutions exist to serve people at every level." Which sounds very egalitarian. But the truth is rather simpler. She said it to the air between them, not quite to him, the way powerful people sometimes address the room rather than a person. People tend to end up exactly where they've worked to be. A soft laugh from somewhere in the lobby. Small, quickly stifled. Daniel was quiet. His phone buzzed in his pocket. He didn't reach for it. "Nothing to say?" Victoria said. "I'm waiting for my receipt," he said. Stephanie, who had frozen with the bills halfway between her and the machine, startled into motion. "Of course, just a yes, 1 moment." Victoria didn't move. She was looking at Daniel with something that had shifted slightly, still cool, still assured, but with a new quality added to it. Not interest, exactly. More like the slight irritation of a person who has deployed a weapon and watched it fail to land. "You know what I find remarkable," she said, "is that people in your position maintain such composure, such dignity, about such small things." The last two words were not cruel in their volume. They were cruel in their precision. "It must require a great deal of effort." "Not really," Daniel said. "No, my daughter thinks $50 is a fortune," he said. "She's been watching that account grow since she was 7 years old. 3 years of deposits. She tracks it. She has a spreadsheet." He said this without expression, without sentiment, simply as information. "She's saving for a school trip to Washington, D.C. She wants to see the Lincoln Memorial. She's read about it 4 times. No one laughed now. The lobby was very quiet. Victoria Hale looked at him. Something moved across her face, too fast to read. "How touching," she said. But the word came out slightly wrong, slightly hollow, as if the timing had shifted from when she'd prepared it. Stephanie slid the receipt under the glass partition. Daniel took it, folded it once, and placed it in his folder. He looked up. "Thank you," he said to Stephanie. Stephanie nodded. She looked like she wanted to say something else. She didn't. Daniel turned. He would have walked out, would have simply walked out, through the marble lobby and the revolving door, and back into the rain, but Victoria Hale was still standing there. And something about that fact, about the specific quality of her stillness, made him pause. He turned back to Stephanie. "Actually," he said, "could I get a printed copy of the full account balance?" "Emily likes to see the total." Victoria's eyes narrowed, almost imperceptibly. Stephanie typed quickly. The printer to her left hummed and produced a single page. She slid it through. Daniel picked it up and looked at it for a moment. His expression shifted, softening, just slightly, at the corners in the way that people's faces change when they're reading something that is not about money at all, but about time, about small increments of effort that have, somehow, accumulated into something. 3 years of bi-weekly deposits. Some of them $50. Some of them $20, in the months when the car needed work or Emily had a school trip or the heat bill came in high. A few of them $75, in the good months, when the overtime came through. All of it there, in neat figures, a column of small numbers that told the story of a particular life lived with particular care. The total, after 3 years, was just over $3,400. For the trip to Washington, D.C., Emily needed $650. They'd talked about it. She knew exactly how many more deposits stood between her and the Lincoln Memorial. She had it on a chart on her bedroom wall, the kind of chart that children make with rulers and colored pencils. The bars filled in with crayon as the target approached. The cat in a graduation cap on today's note was a recent motif Emily had decided, with characteristic logic, that anyone going to Washington, D.C. needed a degree. Daniel folded the page and placed it in the envelope with Emily's crayon cat in the graduation cap. "Could I see that?" Victoria said. Her voice had changed register. Not softer, she wasn't capable of soft. Not then, not in that room, but different. A different quality of command. Less performative, more something else. Something without a name yet. Daniel looked at her. "The deposit slip," she said. "I want to see the account information." He should have said no. He had every right to say no. Instead, he held her gaze for a moment, then reached into the folder and withdrew the deposit slip, not the printed balance, just the slip, and placed it on the counter between them. "Go ahead," he said. He said it the way you give something to someone who you know will not understand what they're holding. A gesture of patience rather than trust. A small, deliberate relinquishing of something that was his to give. Victoria reached for the slip. She picked it up with 2 fingers, the same way she handled documents in boardrooms, quickly, efficiently, extracting information. Her eyes moved to the top line. Account holder: Emily Hale Carter. Account type: Youth Savings. Account number: 004-7723 8816. She read the name again. Emily. Haile. Carter. The slip was cream-colored paper, machine-printed, the kind of form that contains nothing significant by design. Account numbers. Routing numbers. A deposit amount. A date. Her hand went very still. The assistant to her right, the one with the leather portfolio, looked up. He had been watching her peripherally the way experienced assistants watch their principals, not directly, but continuously. Alert to any deviation in the pattern. Victoria Hale's hand was still. "Miss Hale," he said, quietly. She didn't answer him. She looked at the name again. Emily Hale Carter. The Hale was there between Emily and Carter, like something inserted, or something that had always been there. Waiting. A hyphenated identity, a bridge between two names, two worlds. "Where did you get this name?" she said. Her voice was different now. The performance had stopped. What remained underneath was something that had not been heard in public in a very long time. "That's her name," Daniel said. He was watching Victoria carefully now, with an attentiveness that was new. He'd been patient before, contained. But now he was watching her the way you watch something fragile when you realize it might fall. "Emily. She's always had the middle name Hale. It was in her paperwork when she came to me." Victoria looked up from the slip. "When she came to you," she repeated. "Yes. How old was she?" "2, he said. She was 2 years old. The marble floor, the brass fixtures, the cream-colored ceilings, the entire architecture of the place seemed to be held in suspension." Stephanie had stopped typing. The assistant had stopped looking at his tablet. The security detail had maintained their positions, but with a rigidity that was different from their usual professional stillness. Victoria stopped. She tried again. "Does she have there's a mark. Just above her left wrist. Faint. From a burn scar," Daniel said. He said it gently. "From a space heater," the record said. "She was 18 months old. She doesn't remember it." Victoria Hale set the deposit slip down on the counter. She placed it with great precision, aligning it with the edge. And then she stepped back. And the expression on her face was one that no one in that lobby, not the assistants, not the security detail, not Stephanie, not any of the employees who were now absolutely not pretending to do other things, had ever seen on Victoria Hale's face before. Because it was not a business expression. It was the face of someone who has been walking a very long time in the dark, and has just, without warning, seen a light. 8 years ago, Victoria Hale had been a different person, though she would have disputed that characterization. She would have said she was the same person, only less successful. Less refined. Still building. The Meridian Financial Group had existed then, but it was smaller, 8 offices, not 42. She traveled constantly. She slept badly. She measured herself in quarterly targets and market positions, and the particular satisfaction of outmaneuvering people who had underestimated her. Her marriage to Jeffrey Ashby had been, by most external measures, successful. They were photographed at charity functions. They maintained a brownstone in the West Village and a house in Connecticut. Jeffrey was an architect, quiet and thoughtful, who painted watercolors on Sunday mornings, and asked her, with genuine interest, about her work. She had not been, she would later admit to no one but herself, a present wife. When their daughter was born small, red-faced, furious, utterly astonishing, Victoria had been at the hospital for 18 hours, and then taken a call that she felt she couldn't miss. She came back 3 hours later, and held the baby, and felt something enormous and frightening move through her. Like a tectonic event. And then placed the baby back, and answered another call. Jeffrey had filed for divorce when they had named her Emma. Not Emily. That was the first shock. That was the first fracture in the wall she'd been building when Emma was 14 months old. The proceedings were difficult. Contested. Victoria's attorneys were better than Jeffrey's, but Jeffrey had a different kind of evidence. Photographs of Victoria's calendar, deposition from the nanny, a pattern of absence that no attorney could reframe as anything other than what it was. She had been given supervised visitation. She had missed the first appointment because of a merger. She had missed the second because of a regulatory hearing. When Jeffrey's attorneys filed the third filing, citing a pattern of willful absence and citing the child's developmental needs, Victoria had been in Tokyo. She'd read the filing on her phone at 2 in the morning, Tokyo time, and she'd stared at it for a long time. She had not flown home. She had told herself it was because she'd needed to complete the Tokyo deal. She had told herself she would address it when she returned. She had told herself many things. In the particular way that people who are very good at business apply business logic to things that are not business. When she returned, Jeffrey had moved. Not far still New York, but he had moved and changed their number. And the attorney informed her, formally, that given her continued failure to appear, the court had modified the custody arrangement significantly. She had fought. Not hard enough. Or perhaps too late. Or perhaps this was the version that surfaced at 3 in the morning, in the quiet of her apartment. In the years that followed, perhaps she had fought in the wrong way, with attorneys and motions and counterfilings, when the only fight that would have worked was simply to show up. The final order had been sealed. Jeffrey had remarried and relocated. The trail had gone cold. Emma, her daughter, her Emma who had somehow become Emily, who had somehow carried the middle name Hale, had Jeffrey done that? Given her the name she'd carry like a scar, like a thread deliberately left hanging? In case someone ever looked? Or had it been something else, something kinder than she deserved? She stood in the marble lobby of her own bank, and she understood that she had been walking for 8 years in the wrong direction. What was her name? Victoria said. Before, Daniel was quiet for a moment. He had the expression of someone making a decision in real time, weighing something with great care. Emma, he said. That's what the file said. Emma Ashby. She was placed with the county when she was 22 months old. Jeffrey Ashby, her father, had remarried, and then his second wife became ill, and he couldn't manage. He was already in contact with the adoption services. He wanted her placed with someone stable. He gave her up, Victoria said. The words came out flat. He was in an impossible situation, Daniel said. He said it without judgment, which was remarkable given everything. He was a good man who had run out of capacity. That's my read. Anyway, I only met him once. He paused. He asked me to keep the name Hale as a middle name. He said her mother might come looking one day. Victoria made a sound that was not quite a word. He thought you might come looking, Daniel said. I didn't know where. I know, he said. I know you didn't know. And then, more quietly, but I did wonder. Every time I looked at that middle name, the assistant had quietly guided the other employees away from the immediate area. He was a good assistant. Victoria would remember that. How is she? Victoria said. The question came from somewhere she hadn't accessed in years. Unpolished. Raw. Without strategic intent. She's extraordinary, Daniel said. He said it the way parents say things about their children, when they mean it completely, not to impress, not to boast, but because the word is simply the most accurate one available. She's reading at a 9th grade level. She volunteers at the animal shelter on Saturdays. She argues with me about bedtime and loses every time, but she comes back with better arguments the next night. His mouth moved toward a smile. She wants to be an astrophysicist or a veterinarian. She's trying to decide which animals she'd rather help, the ones on Earth or the ones she hasn't discovered yet. Victoria Hale closed her eyes. She stood in the lobby of her bank, in her cashmere coat, with her assistants and her security and the entire architecture of her constructed life arranged around her, and she closed her eyes. I need to see her, she said. I know, Daniel said. She doesn't know about me. A beat. She knows she was adopted, Daniel said. She knows she had a mother whose name started with H. She doesn't know your name. She asked me once she was 8, and I told her that when she was ready to look, I'd help her look. She said. He stopped, and the smile came fully this time, brief and aching. She said she was already pretty busy, that she'd get to it. She said that. She was 8. Victoria looked at him, the man standing across from her in the faded jacket, with the folder and the deposit slip and the crayon drawing of a cat in a graduation cap, who had for 8 years been raising her daughter in a city she had walked through 1,000 times without knowing. "Why didn't you when you saw my name on the building?" "I saw it the first time I came here," he said. 18 months ago. Emily picked this branch because it was closest to her school. He held her gaze. "I thought about it. I thought about it a lot. And I decided it wasn't my decision to make," he said. "She was 9. She's 10 now. She has a routine, a school, friends. She has a life." He paused. "I wasn't going to disrupt that on my timeline. I was going to wait for hers." The lobby was very, very quiet. Stephanie was crying silently at her station. She had made no attempt to hide it, and no one had asked her to. The revolving door at the entrance turned. Emily Carter came in from the rain with her backpack hiked high, and her sneakers leaving small wet prints on the marble. She was wearing a yellow raincoat, the cheap kind, bright, cheerful, and her dark hair was pulled into a lopsided ponytail that had clearly been done by herself that morning. She was holding her phone and looking at it with the focused intensity of someone checking something important. She looked up and found her father immediately. Children always know where their parents are in a room. Dad. She made her way across the lobby without hesitation. Without any sense that this was a place she didn't belong, without any awareness of the architecture of wealth that surrounded her. She simply walked through it, because her father was on the other side. "I have 40 minutes before Miss Pruitt's class, and the quiz got pushed to next week because Tyler Bennett threw up in the hallway. So I walked over because you said you were coming here." She stopped. Not because someone told her to stop. She stopped because she looked up from her father's face and saw the woman standing near the counter, and something about the quality of the silence in the room registered, finally, as significant. Emily Carter was 10 years old. She was perceptive in the way that children who have spent time navigating the world mostly alongside an adult are perceptive. She read rooms. She read faces. She was alert to subtext in the way that other children her age were not. She looked at Victoria Hale. Victoria Hale looked at Emily Carter. The burn scar barely visible. A thin, pale line just above the left wrist was partially visible below the sleeve of the yellow raincoat. Victoria made no sound. She did nothing that could have been described, clinically, as a breakdown. She simply looked at Emily Carter for a long moment, and the architecture of her face, the controlled, practiced, impenetrable architecture that she had built over 5 decades quietly fell. Not dramatically. Not with tears or gasping or any of the things that get described in reunion stories. It fell the way very old structures fall when the foundation shifts. Slowly at first, and then all at once. And then you can see what was underneath, and what was underneath was just a woman. "Emily," Daniel said. "This is Miss Hale." Emily looked at him, then back at Victoria. "You run the bank," Emily said. Victoria blinked. "Yes. Your name is on the building." "It is." Emily tilted her head. There was something in her face, not recognition, not yet, but something adjacent to it. A resonance she couldn't name. "Why are you looking at my dad like that?" she said. Not accusatory, not protective, just curious. Direct in the way that children are direct, when they haven't yet learned to soften their questions for other people's comfort. Victoria looked at Daniel. Daniel looked at Emily. "Miss Hale," he said carefully, "has some things she'd like to talk about. With both of us. If that's okay with you, Em." Emily considered this. She was 10. She weighed it with the seriousness of someone taking it at face value. "Is it about the deposit?" she said. "It's about something else," Daniel said. "Okay." She looked at Victoria again, something moving behind her eyes that she couldn't have articulated and didn't try to. "Do you want to sit down?" "You look like you need to sit down." Victoria Hale, who had built a financial empire from a studio apartment and 3 maxed credit cards, who had sat across from hostile boards and walked away intact, who had never once in a professional context been told she needed anything, looked at this 10-year-old girl in the yellow raincoat. "Yes," she said. "I think I do." They sat in the private meeting room off the main lobby, which the branch manager had quickly made available, and which the assistants and security detail had quietly vacated, leaving only Daniel and Emily and Victoria. Emily had taken off her wet raincoat. She sat across from Victoria with her backpack on the table beside her, and her ponytail dripping slightly onto her collar. And she watched the woman across from her with the calm, direct attention of someone who has decided to take a situation seriously. Victoria sat with her hands clasped on the table. The cashmere coat was still on. Her chignon was still perfect. Everything external was still precisely as it had been. Everything internal was not. "You adopted Emily," she said to Daniel. "Not a question. 3 years ago," he said. "We'd been fostering for a year before that. You were a foster father before you were—" "It's what I do," he said. "I'm a social worker. I specialize in older child placement." He said it without emphasis, without the particular inflation that people sometimes give to altruistic professions. Just a fact about his life. She was the first I kept. That's not the policy. It's usually not the right thing to do. But she was extraordinary, Victoria said. From the first day, he said. Emily was listening to this conversation about herself, with the expression of someone listening to a story they know well, but haven't heard told by these particular voices. "Miss Hale," she said. Victoria looked at her. "Are you my birth mom?" The room held its breath. Victoria Hale, who had survived hostile takeovers and regulatory investigations, and a divorce that had nearly cost her the company she'd built, who had been called ruthless in print, and had worn the word like armor, did not answer immediately, because the answer was enormous. Because the answer was 8 years of wrong turns, and missed appointments and calls she'd taken instead of flights she should have boarded. Because the answer contained multitudes of failure that no amount of financial success had ever been able to balance against. "Yes," she said, "I am." Emily looked at her for a long moment. 10 years old. Backpack on the table. Ponytail dripping. She had asked the question the same way she'd asked about sitting down directly, without armor, because she was 10 and hadn't built armor yet. "Okay," Emily said. Victoria blinked. "Okay?" Emily looked at her father briefly, then back. I don't know what I'm supposed to feel. I've thought about this. About what it would be like to meet my birth parents. I thought about my birth dad too, but Dad said he doesn't live in New York anymore." So she shrugged, in the way 10-year-olds shrug at large things, because they haven't yet learned to pretend that large things aren't manageable. "I have a lot of questions." "So do I," Victoria said. "You can go first," Emily said. "You look like yours are harder." Victoria stared at her. Daniel made no sound, but something in his expression, something soft, something that was not quite a smile but was adjacent to one, was the expression of a man who has spent 3 years watching a person come into herself and is watching it happen again right now and knows better than to interrupt. "I want to." Victoria stopped. She was not good at this. She was good at other things, many things, important things. This was not one of them. "I want you to know that leaving you was not what I got." She stopped again. Started again. "I made choices. When you were very small. Choices that I told myself I was making for good reasons, and some of those reasons were real. And some of them were I was afraid. I was afraid of how much you needed me, and I didn't know how to be what you needed." She looked at her hands. "That is not a good excuse. I'm not offering it as one. I want you to hear the true version rather than the flattering one." Emily was quiet for a moment. "Dad's afraid sometimes too," she said. "He gets scared when I'm sick. He tries to hide it, but I can tell." She looked at Daniel. "He stays up all night and pretends he just happened to be in the kitchen." Back to Victoria. "Being afraid doesn't make you a bad person. It just means you needed to be braver than you were." The tears, when they came quietly. Victoria Hale did not sob or gasp or reach for anything. She simply sat with her hands clasped and let her eyes fill and didn't look away. Because she had looked away for 8 years, and she was not going to do it again. They stayed in that room for 2 hours. Emily asked her questions, which ranged from the practical, "Do you have any pets?" to the cosmological, "Do you believe in anything after you die?" Victoria answered all of them. which required, in several cases, more honesty than she had been accustomed to deploying. Daniel asked no questions. He sat at the corner of the table and watched. And, occasionally, when Emily glanced at him, gave the small nod that meant, "You're doing fine. Keep going." When Emily went to the restroom, she'd asked for a granola bar, and the assistant, who was apparently still monitoring the situation from outside the door, had produced one with remarkable speed. Victoria looked at Daniel. "I want to be part of her life," she said. "I know. I have the resources to." "Stop," he said. Not unkindly, just firmly. "Don't go there." She stopped. "She doesn't need your resources," he said. "She needs what every kid needs. Time. Consistency. Effort. The thing you were just doing in this room for the last 90 minutes, being honest, when it would have been easier to manage the story. She needs that." He met her gaze. "Can you do that?" "Reliably. Not when it's convenient." "Reliably." Victoria held his gaze. "I don't know," she said. He blinked. He'd expected, he realized, a different answer. "That's the right answer," he said. "I've never been." She paused. "I've never been good at the reliable version of things. I'm very good at the exceptional version. Extraordinary gestures. Grand commitments. I've built my entire life on the capacity to do enormous things." She looked at her hands. "I'm not sure I know how to do the $50 version." He looked at her for a long moment. "That's the most honest thing you've said since you walked in," he said. "I said a great deal of honest things in the last." "The most honest," he said. "Because that's the actual question. Not whether you love her. You love her. That's obvious. That's been obvious since you read the name on that slip." He leaned forward slightly. "The question is whether you can show up on a Tuesday. Whether you can sit through a geography quiz story that goes on too long. Whether you can disappoint her and then call and actually deal with it." He paused. "Whether you can be ordinary for her, because she needs ordinary more than she needs extraordinary." The door opened. Emily came back with a second granola bar she'd apparently negotiated from the assistant, and dropped back into her chair. "Are you guys negotiating?" she said. "You both look like you're negotiating." "We are, a little," Daniel said. Emily opened her second granola bar with the focused attention she gave to all operations. "About me?" "About what happens next," Daniel said. She chewed thoughtfully. "I can tell you what I want," she said. "If that helps." Both adults looked at her. "I want Dad to still be Dad." "That's not a question. He's my dad." She said this without cruelty and without apology, simply as an established fact. "And I want to. I'm curious about you." She looked at Victoria. "You're a stranger right now. But you're a stranger who's connected to me, which is a different kind of stranger. I'd like to find out who you actually are." She paused. Slowly. "Not in a hurry. I have a lot going on. There's the trip and the science fair, and I'm trying to get to the next level in my robotics class." Victoria stared at her. "Slowly," she said. "One coffee," Emily said. "Or whatever you drink. Dad drinks terrible coffee. Maybe you have better taste." A pause. "We can go from there." Daniel Carter looked at his daughter, the 10-year-old girl who had come into his life at the age of 7, wet from the rain and carrying everything she owned in a plastic bag, who had looked at his apartment and said, "This is okay. I can work with this," and he felt, as he often did, the particular species of awe that comes from knowing a person who is fundamentally more resilient than you will ever be. "One coffee," Victoria said. It was not a small agreement. In the language of what that room had just negotiated, it was enormous. 3 weeks later, Victoria Hale stood before the Meridian First National staff at a Friday morning meeting she had called with 48 hours' notice, enough time for people to prepare, not enough time for them to manage their anxiety about it. She stood at the front of the conference room without a podium, without a presentation, without the usual scaffolding of corporate communication. 3 weeks ago, she said, I walked through this branch, and behaved in a way that was unacceptable. She said it plainly, without elaboration, without context. I spoke to a customer in a manner that was condescending, dismissive, and beneath the standards I've asked this organization to uphold. I did it because I was in a bad habit, the habit of measuring people by the size of their transactions. She paused. That habit has cost me more than I can calculate. I'm done with it. She looked at Stephanie, who was sitting in the third row and who had clearly not expected to be in this meeting at all. You handled that situation professionally, Victoria said. With more grace than I did. Stephanie said nothing. She was, quite visibly, attempting not to cry at work for the second time in 3 weeks. Going forward, Victoria said, Meridian First National will be launching a program. I'm calling it the $50 Initiative, because naming things after the thing that shook you awake is a habit I'm also trying to develop. A small sound moved through the room, not quite laughter. Something gentler. The program will provide matched savings accounts for single-parent families below the income threshold, with no minimum deposit requirements. The documentation is being finalized. I'll share it when it's ready. She looked around the room. The man who made that deposit 3 weeks ago declined to be involved in the naming of this program, she said. He also declined to serve on the advisory board, declined the honorarium, and told me, and I'm paraphrasing, that he didn't need a financial institution to validate the choices he'd already made. She let that settle. I thought you should know that too. She was quiet for a moment. The room waited. I've spent 30 years building things, she said finally. Buildings with my name on them. Programs with my name attached. Initiatives and endowments and partnerships. All of which will outlast me. All of which will be cited in the profile pieces and the retrospectives. She looked at the table, then back up. None of them cost me anything that mattered. I wrote the checks. I attended the dinners. I said the right things to the right people. She paused. What that man does, what he has been doing for 3 years, bi-weekly, with $50 at a time, in this branch, at that window, costs him something. It costs him sleep and overtime, and the best years of his energy. And he does it without ceremony, without acknowledgement, without his name on anything. She stopped. I'm trying to understand what that means. I don't fully understand it yet, but I'm trying. The branch manager, a careful man in his late 40s named Robert Finch, who had been employed by Meridian Financial Group for 11 years and had never once been in the same room as Victoria Hale before this month, raised his hand slightly. Miss Hale, he said. Will Mr. Carter be? Will he know about the initiative? He already knows, she said. He told me he hoped it would help people. Then he said he had to get to work. She smiled, a small, real thing, unexpected on her face, and all the more striking for it. He's a social worker. He had a case visit at 9. Robert Finch nodded slowly. He also, Victoria said, sent me a photograph of the account balance printout because Emily wanted me to see how close she is to the Washington, D.C. trip. A pause. She's $187 away. In case anyone was wondering, there was a longer silence. And then someone in the back, one of the junior tellers, a young man named Patrick, who had been there the morning it happened, and had told the story to every person he knew, began to applaud. Quietly at first. Then not quietly. Victoria Hale stood at the front of the room and accepted this, not with her usual composure, which was the composure of someone who expects applause and has learned to receive it gracefully, but with something different, something that looked, from the third row where Stephanie sat with her hands pressed together and her eyes bright, very much like gratitude. The rain had stopped. Daniel Carter stood outside the branch. After picking Emily up from school, she had a tutoring session on Fridays now, 2 blocks away. And he walked her there and picked her up, the same as always, and she was telling him about a documentary she'd seen in science class about black holes. They don't actually suck things in, she said, with the emphasis of someone correcting a popular misconception. It's just that the gravity is so strong that things can't not go toward them. It's different. Is it? He said. The distinction matters, Dad. Of course it does. His phone buzzed. A text from an unfamiliar number that he now had saved under a name. Emily mentioned you like the coffee from the place on 43rd. I've never been. She suggested we try it Saturday. She said to confirm with you. This is me confirming. He read it twice. He thought about the marble lobby, and the deposit slip, and the 2 weeks of overtime shifts that had produced the $50 that had been deposited into Emily's account on the morning of a rainy Friday in October. He thought about the printed balance, folded into the envelope with the crayon cat. He thought about how things accumulate. Not the dramatic things, not the meetings in private rooms or the revelations or the moments that you'd tell the story around, but the other things. The bi-weekly deposits, the ibuprofen on the subway platform, the ironed shirt, the folded note in the envelope. He thought about how the story of a life is mostly made of the small, repeated, uncelebrated acts of showing up, and how the dramatic moments are just the places where all that accumulation suddenly becomes visible to someone else. He thought about the morning 3 years ago when Emily had arrived with her plastic bag and had stood in his apartment doorway and looked around with those serious dark eyes and said, "This is okay, I can work with this," as if she were doing him a favor by accepting his home, which in some ways she had been. He thought about the bar graph on her bedroom wall, slowly filling in toward the Lincoln Memorial. He typed back, "Saturday works, 10 a.m. He put his phone in his pocket. "Dad?" Emily was looking up at him, with the expression she got when she was about to ask something she'd been building to for a while. "Are you okay?" "Yeah," he said. "Yeah, I'm good." She considered this. "She texted you, didn't she? Am I that obvious? You went somewhere for a second," she said. "Like in your head. You do that when something important happened and you're deciding if it's okay." She reached over and took his hand, matter-of-factly, the way she'd done since she was 7. "It's okay, Dad. It's a lot. It's okay for it to be a lot." He looked down at her. "When did you get so smart?" he said. "I've always been this smart," she said. "You're just finally paying attention." He laughed. The laugh came from somewhere genuine and uncomplicated. The way laughs do when you're not performing them. They walked the rest of the block in the November air, past the coffee shop on 43rd without stopping, because Saturday was Saturday, and today was today, and the city moved around them the way cities do, indifferent and enormous, and somehow, improbably, large enough to hold all of it. Daniel had spent years explaining to colleagues and caseworkers and well-meaning people at department holiday parties why he fostered and adopted when the system was this hard, when the paperwork was this thick, when the outcomes were this uncertain. He never had a good short answer. The long answer was too long for parties, and the true answer, which was that some things just require you to show up, and the showing up is the whole of it, and the meaning comes after, not before, was the kind of answer that sounded simple and wasn't. Emily was the true answer, he supposed. Not because she was exceptional, though she was, but because she had been 2 years old and afraid and alone, and he had been 35 and uncertain, and they had each decided, without anyone asking them to try. The $50 sat in Emily's account, growing, as it had been growing, in the small incremental way that most important things grow without fanfare, without acknowledgement, without anyone declaring it significant. It was significant. It had always been significant. That was the thing about small things. They don't stay small. They become everything. When everything you had was this: a folder, a deposit slip, a girl in a yellow raincoat who walked into the right room at the right moment because she wanted to see where her father went on Friday mornings. And she'd always been that curious. From the first day,